Hello, everybody. This is Raul, and I'm here with the Catch Wrestling Alliance. This is our live stream, our podcast. So we keep real wrestling alive here. Hopefully, everything is working as it should. Hopefully, the sound is good. Let me know, though, in the comments, because we have a pretty interesting, well, we always have really interesting information for you guys. So let's go ahead and get into it, really. So Farmer Burns had this thing he called his theory of time, and this is what he feels is like his main point as to like why he was so successful in competition, right, and grappling and whatnot. But he thinks you can kind of you can apply all this to everyday life, right? So let's go ahead and, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Right. So this is from Farmer Burns' book, The Life Work of Farmer Burns. So this is chapter 8. Okay. So what he's talking about is really, which is really cool because this book again came out in the early 1900s, um, and Farmer Burns is really into like psychology and like the whole idea of like mind body connection. So again, this is basically what we're gonna be talking about here, right? So let's kind of get into it here. So the reasoning process also suggested another possibility to his mind. So Farmer Burns' mind. He's talking about growing up and how he basically had to adjust, kind of like from being a little kid into being an adult, and how his way of thinking changed, right? So he talks basically about trying to like hone in these mind body connections, right? And so he says, uh, right, by regular habits and constant practice, he could develop a mental organism that would materially aid him in winning for himself the coveted gold of champion wrestler of the world, right? So the coveted goal of champion wrestler of the world, right? So even as a youth, he really wanted to, he already dreamed of becoming like world champion wrestler. Because at that time, again, it wasn't so much all the what we call worked matches where the ending was predetermined. And so it was much more of a real thing. And then we also have other people who kind of have that understanding where it's like their idea, or like say we have Nat Pendleton was one of the persons that I think is a really great example where he was much younger than Farmer Burns and also Frank Gotch, but his dream was becoming the pro champion of the world. But again, like later, as especially as time went on, wrestling matches became more predetermined. So people like Nat, he decided that he didn't want to be doing these predetermined matches, or we call worked matches. So he quit because he could find other jobs and other things that interested him. So he took off, just like several others, like Earl Caddick as well. I'd probably also throw in Joe Stecker because he and Caddick were they were asked to do like a tour of predetermined matches, and they both refused because they were the ones who you'd be able to find their videos on YouTube. There's one of like one of the earliest pro catch wrestling matches. It took place in Madison Square Garden. They sold it out. Yeah, and it's pretty decent quality, right? So you can still see it on YouTube. Um, the quality on YouTube isn't as good as the actual video itself. I had the very like the huge opportunity to view it because the man who found it was Mike Chapman, the wrestling historian, and so he showed me his copy, and he believes that the copy on YouTube was basically a copy of his copy, and he wasn't sure how that got leaked out. But anyway, you can see much more detail in the original version, but you can still see good detail on the version on YouTube. It's just much more faded, but you can still make out some stuff. Um, All right, so let's go and get back to Farmer Burns' idea of the whole idea of this kind of mental, so like mind body connection stuff. That he actually talks about it a lot, but here he he wants to kind of take time out to explain how it evolved in his way of thinking that made him a champion. All right, so he said he tried and he believes that the brain, with its telegraph system of nerves, should be the director of every move, and that by practice, you can leave the transmitting of the messages to that center of the brain called instinct, which is cultivated by experience. Right. So he often talks about, just basically doing reps, drilling, sparring, and you want to do it so much, and you want to train your body so much that it can work for you, right? So like you want to make sure you have the flexibility and the strength, and you want to eat right so that you actually have the energy and the range of motion and the strength to do what your mind wants your body to do at the time that it needs to be done. Yeah. So he says his objective, of course, was to instinctively protect himself from any chance advantage gained by his opponent, while allowing his conscious mental faculties to search for the opponent's weak points. And again, when the weak point was discovered, to make quicker time in reaching that spot. This is what he calls his theory of time. Right? He was on time, and his opponent, who worked only with his physical powers, was behind time because he was forced to be on the protective instead of the aggressive. He was always too late. Right. So if you read more of his instructional stuff, like his correspondence course stuff, he always talks about being on time, especially when you are, say, if you are attempting, say, like a single leg, if you're trying to grab someone's leg, if you are able, like if you go reach for it and you grab it and you actually get a firm hold onto their leg, then you are on time according to Farmer Burns. But if you reach for it and your opponent moves his leg out of the way, then you are actually behind time, and your opponent was on time. So this kind of can give you another example of Farmer Burns' understanding or his usage of the word time to teach wrestling. Right. So hopefully that kind of gives you guys a good understanding. Right. Okay. So let's go ahead and continue because he has some other good points here. Um, when the farmer goes onto the mat, he commences to breathe rapidly, using both the muscles of the breast and the abdomen. This increases the circulation, and he has stronger mental and physical powers as a result. This, the farmer says, is the whole secret of my success. I simply use common sense and save my strength. All right. He says, I save my strength for the final rush. I work quickly and unexpectedly. The man who temporizes is lost, and I never went in to lose. I avoided except so then this is the other part that we kind of brush over because he says it all the time, and I've told you a lot. Where basically, I just said it a little while ago, where he kind of then goes on to say, like, he tries to eat right, he doesn't like smoke or drink, he tries to get enough sleep, all these other things that he always talks about. So that his body can be ready to take orders from his mind, and then train through training and like habit, or he says through habit, right? So like drilling and sparring and stuff, then these commands can become automatic, right? And he says, so that goes into the part of your brain we call instinct, right? So usually in science, we usually kind of call those kind of things that your body just does naturally. So like all the organ function and stuff like that, we call it part of the autonomic nervous system, so that things are just happening even without your brain having to consciously tell it to be done, right? So I think that's kind of what he's trying to get at, where it's like you want to embody these things or do these things so much that you can instinctively just do a lot of things, but then also at the same time, especially during a match, you can then look for the weak spot of your opponent and then be so mentally present that you can detect what it is, like detect what the weak spot is, and then attack that weak spot so that you can win. Right. So let's go ahead and skip over to the next part, because he just talks about like preparing his body and not drinking and all that, and so he says this theory of time is theory no longer. It is known. It is a known law. It is cause and effect, the intelligent control of mind over matter. There are many who are not wrestlers who could adapt this law to themselves with profit. For there are many tasks in life that could be lightened considerably by using only those powers in their performance that are absolutely necessary, holding enough energy in reserve to meet the unexpected. Right. Um, so he says, yeah, it's like you can apply this in all kinds of ways, not just wrestling, but whatever kind of job you do, whatever other sports, whatever you can apply it there as well. So put simply, where it's like you train your body, you take good care of it, right? So you can kind of think they always use that whole idea about like the sports car, where it's like it gets the race car in particular that's used in pro races. They got the whole team working on it, and you're not going to just put any kind of fuel inside there, right? You'll break it, right, if you put the wrong stuff in there, or if you just put cheap parts or whatever when it needs maintenance. So you really should think of your body in the same way, because even more so because we don't necessarily have parts to replace certain parts of our physical body. I mean, we have different surgeries for like knee replacements and hip replacements and stuff like that, but it's still not the same as our biological parts, right? So um, you want to be really taking care of your body as best as you can, and so that you can prevent the need for certain types of like surgeries or anything like that. And so Farmer Burns believes that is by getting enough sleep, not drinking and smoking, and eating a lot of vegetables, going outside, working out, drilling, doing all these types of wrestling specific exercises. But he also does, he talks about lifting weights, and so he's not one of the types of people to say that like, oh, the best exercise for wrestling is only doing wrestling. No, he kind of takes more of a holistic point of view, where it is like like the weights and say even stretching and all that stuff. Like the way stretching helps in particular is like it helps to keep you having a wide range of motion, right? So that means if you do get kind of stretched into a difficult position, it's not going to be like damaging to you. You're not necessarily going to submit. You're not necessarily going to get pinned. You can find a way out. But that's true even in modern day like sports science or sports physiology. Having a good range of motion and doing stretching, which is like the thing that people tend to hate the most, that is going to prevent injury. So if you have the ideal range of motion, and actually there's charts that like used by doctors and stuff to kind of let us know in these tests like what your normal range of motion should be. And then basically if you're within the healthy range, then you can think of yourself as like less susceptible to getting injured, right? So the main thing that like people get a lot of the times is like sciatic nerve pain. So it's like pain that comes from their lower back or hip, and then it goes down their leg, usually down to the calf, or sometimes all the way down to the bottom of the foot. So usually those people don't have the proper range of motion, right? So over time, they've gotten tighter and tighter and tighter. So that can create a situation where either you get, because sciatic nerve pain can be like the root of the problem could be at the spine, or it could also be at your hip. So basically, like especially the hip version one, where you have this, it's called the piriformis muscle. It's one of our hip muscles that it's a deeper one that's like right on top of your sciatic nerve. So if that one's really tight, it can compress or just put a lot of pressure on your sciatic nerve. So then you get pain going down your leg, and it's usually called like piriformis syndrome. And that if you have to have sciatic pain, that's probably the kind of pain you're going to want to get, because a lot of times, rehabbing it is easier than if it's a problem with your spine. But again, you could have prevented it, right? So, that's why you got to be doing these other types of training. You got to be using your range of motion. You got to be, stretching it out, strengthening everything, like lifting the weights and doing all that stuff. And through modern research, it just corroborates the ideas of Farmer Burns, right? He was talking about like these kind of strength and conditioning ideas, and that's basically how we train nowadays. So I used to be a trainer for UCLA, and also we I worked in many different things at UCLA. So I even helped make up, like I worked to even help print up some of these manuals for some of the student athletes as well, because what UCLA did was they for each sport. So, including, whatever, water polo or all these kinds of sports that we have, um, they would give kids like kind of like training manuals that they could be doing like over summer or whatever. And a lot of it was showing how to do proper lifts and stuff so that they can be working out on their own. So that all this stuff really helps to like keep your body strong, but also keep it ready to be used completely by your brain, right? Or your instinct, right? So when it needs to move, you don't even have to. There's no lag time, right, between your desire to move or your understanding of when you need to move and how you need to move, and your body executing that order, right? So that is kind of like the whole idea, or kind of like the essence of Farmer Burns' theory of time. And that's what he called it, his theory of time. Um, and so he kind of basically, and that's kind of one of the things where he talks about it. Definitely in this book, his life work of Farmer Burns, he talks about it a lot. Where the whole mental aspect is the main thing. So if your brain is working optimally and your body is well taken care of, then in a match, you'll be able to get into the zone, basically. I think ultimately that's what these like these practices kind of help you get into, because like he mentions, like before a match, he'll do like some quick breathing, like some deep breathing, into we call like diaphragm. So he talks about using not only his lungs but also his belly muscles, right? So it's usually called the diaphragm. So if you're doing like he does this whole belly breathing kind of type of thing that kind of gets his blood circulating. And this is stuff you'll see people do nowadays, but also done in like all kinds of cultures around the world. You'll see it done in a lot of like yoga practices, but also too, since he talks about breathing, this is also what's incorporated into a lot of meditative practices. So um, meditative practices are like, say, like there's all types of ways of doing meditation. So don't necessarily think of it as like someone sitting down and just they're still the whole time. That is one way of doing meditation. It's just like seated meditation, but there's all types of what we call moving meditations, right? And you can also think of prayer as meditation, um, but also say like moving meditations are, say, yoga, or for the like there's this thing called qigong. I don't know if you guys know about that, but it's somewhat popular. It's kind of like tai chi, but I think it's easier. Actually, it's much more easy to get into that meditative aspect than Tai Chi, because in Tai Chi, you have to learn a big, long sequence of moves, and then you have to practice that over and over again. And then once you can do it where you're not thinking about it, so say like how Farmer Burns is talking about, you get it where it becomes instinct. Well, that like getting something to where it becomes instinct takes time, right? It takes repetition, so that something becomes, just like effortless for your body to do, or just where it becomes so automatic that it can be done with minimal thought. It takes time, right? So Tai Chi is kind of like that. Qigong is a lot less like that, because it's not necessarily a sequence of moves. It's definitely more kind of like positions and minimal movements, there's heavy focus on breathing and visualization, right? So that I've noticed can get people really into that whole meditative kind of in the zone kind of aspect, or that in the zone type of um, what's called that state, right? Or that flow state, where again, if you can basically, you can, what it is like, it gets you almost like hyper focused, where it's like you can focus on your task. And so in the case of sports, right, in the case of Farmer Burns, it's wrestling, right? So you're not distracted by the crowd, or whatever stress you've had with your personal life or work or whatever. You're just focused and on your task of the match, but your body is then able to do so. Like you say, if your brain is hyper focused, you kind of know what to do. But then if you haven't been taking care of your body, then it's like you're dragging this body behind your mind, right? So then like, so using Farmer Burns words, right? So say if you see the need to go for a single leg technique, and your brain is like this broke down this broke down old car, right, that you haven't taken care of, you never changed the oil, and got a flat tire and all that. Your body then won't be able to complete the task that your mind perceived that needs to be done, right? So that's why all these things, in order to kind of like fire on all cylinders, you need all these components for you to be on time, according to Farmer Burns, right? So I think that's my piece about that. I mean, you can totally, you can, I'm sure people have other types of meditative things. And so since Farmer Burns kind of mentions breathing in particular, I know nowadays with the Wim Hof, that dude, he's he's getting popular, and his thing is all about breathing, and he shows how like his breathing technique can get people to withstand like freezing temperatures and all that. So there's power in all these types of things. And Farmer Burns, he seemed to be like super inquisitive. He grew up really poor, um, but his brain was just like super inquisitive, always wanting to learn. In his book, he just cites all these types of articles and books and stuff like that. So um, he basically tried to learn and extrapolate and kind of apply the different ideas of his time, right? So, but what's cool about what he's saying is that a lot of it is still applicable today, and a lot of it has been corroborated by modern research. So a lot of times, athletic research, especially nowadays, at least back when I was at UCLA, I mean, I'm sure there's probably other organizations that provide valid like sports science research, but the one that we really relied upon or valued was called the National Strength and Conditioning Association. I believe they're still probably considered one of the leaders in sports science research. Um, you can always check them out, because they do research on all types of aspects to improve training and athletic performance. So that could be another source if you guys want to kind of look up some of this stuff. All right, so yeah, let's go ahead and get to your questions. So let me see. Pancho, this is super informative. Okay, cool. I'm glad. Feel free to ask any questions, because I can give my 2 cents. But what I guess I'm really, really maybe amazed, or I mean, I guess I shouldn't be amazed because Farmer Burns was such a successful wrestler, that I guess I shouldn't be amazed that he has like this kind of sophisticated understanding of like kind of like this mind body connection that led to his success, right? And again, like the sad thing was that like he was able to like train another champion like Frank Gotch, and but unfortunately he outlived Frank Gotch as well, and he just so Frank Gotch died around age 38, I believe. But Farmer Burns went on still like very active. I believe it into his 50s and all that. So yeah, I think it goes to show where it's like if you're doing all these things, you could your body can support you for a very very long time. Okay, Patrick. In your opinion, how applicable is flow grappling, and how often would you recommend utilizing it in practice? Um, I think um, I think you can use it whenever you're tired, but it's really like again just kind of knowing your opponent. I mean, you'll have a coach, say like the really famous coach Billy Riley. His famous quote that I like. He says like you wrestle everyone like they're world class. And again, you have stories from his gym where it's like people they kind of brutalized each other in that gym, and like they felt like if you asked someone to spar, they took it as like an offense, or you really want to fight them, so then they wrestled with you really hard. But again, I don't think you have to be that way, and especially all the time, because then what are you going to get, right? A lot of times you can get injured, and then say if you have a match coming up, then you won't be prepared for it because you got to be taking up all this time to heal, right? So you can flow, and then basically when you flow, you can go to where you get to some like a submission point, and then just give it up. Recognize that it happened, recognize how you got there, and then you guys can just continue on from there. Just let go of that position, and then see where you can get from there. A lot of times you can figure out a lot of cool techniques just by flowing, just by continuing. Like you bridge out of a pin and or a submission hold, and you'll see how that maybe you could have gotten out earlier, or you can learn a lot of things by kind of breaking it down. The flow, you can think of the flow version of wrestling. That can be kind of like the wrestling version of Tai Chi, where they take some fighting moves, and you do it as slowly as possible. Then you can kind of learn a lot about it, where you can learn a lot about like your balance, and where your feet really should be to optimize your balance, so it makes it harder for you to fall down. Or there's things you can do by, or there's a lot of things you can learn from flow grappling. Pancho, as a complete beginner, how does someone get into catch? Well, if you're in LA, come train. It looks like the gyms, like it seems like I guess COVID has been decreasing like so fast in LA that so everyone they're saying like tons and tons of people got vaccinated, and the instance of COVID is just like dropping so fast that in Los Angeles County and Orange County, the county south of us, they'll probably allow gyms to reopen, like even by Monday or something. So so fast, like it's pretty crazy. But so if you're in LA, come on over. I'll see you. I'll see you in I think the gym that I teach at. It's called Fight Science MMA. They probably will open next month, April. So we won't just jump into it like on Monday, like the newspapers are talking about. But it'll probably take some time to get a schedule going and stuff. And you're welcome to come train here in LA. The gym is. It's located in this part of LA called, we call it Mid City. So it's right in the middle of the city, right? That's why they call it Mid City. But if you're around, it's kind of a centralized location. So you should be able to come. It's near one of the major freeways. All right. Oh, and if you're not nearby, like my buddy John Strickland's on the East Coast. Also, we have our online academy, CWA Academy, that you can go through our website, catchwrestlingalliance.com. Spaz. We used to call it water wrestling. Go slow for balance. Yeah, good comment. Patrick, are there any catch wrestling schools near Norcal Bay Area? Patrick, I'd love it if you can be the leader in Norcal Bay Area. Right? So come down and train, do the online stuff, and you can be the leader there. Because I've had some people come down, but it's just so few and far between, and like people don't really stick with it. So we haven't really set up anything up there, like anything concrete. So it can be you, Patrick. Yeah. So, but in the meantime, if I think that also what I'm going to be doing is have like adding to our website people who've completed at least like to the level 1 certification, and we'll put that up online so you can at least train with someone who's done our at least 2 foundational courses in catch wrestling. So that's like the stand-up fundamentals and also the ground fundamentals. And what you do is you practice those moves and then you submit them to me, and then I'll give you notes on like things to fix or things to change, and then once everything's satisfactory, then you'll get like the level 1 certification. We have 4 levels, and then you'll get basically more access to more instructional videos, like more advanced stuff, and some kind of coaching tips on like coaching others in catch wrestling. All right, so that's kind of what we got going on. Go ahead and continue asking any questions. But also, too, just want to let you guys know that so this is going to be in podcast version. If you might be listening to the podcast right now, in the future at least. So usually, what I do is like we'll take this the audio of this live stream, and then we'll put it up on our podcast, which will be available like on basically wherever you get your podcast from. We put it up on Anchor, so then that then disperses it out to Spotify and Google, iTunes, and all that. Bancho, do you have any theories why wrestlers tend to dominate in MMA? A lot of it is that top-down approach, because in fighting, right, especially MMA, or I talk about it too, like in kickboxing, you start standing, you have then in order to um, get someone down on the ground, you throw them down, and usually you're the one on top. You're not necessarily like grabbing onto someone and then pulling them down on top of you. And there in jiu-jitsu, a lot of those types of throws or a lot of those types of takedowns are taught, where it's like maybe you can kind of pull someone down onto you. So wrestling kind of matches the that whole idea, that top-down approach. Wrestling again isn't necessarily especially amateur wrestling nowadays. It doesn't like it's not catch wrestling, so I'd say it's like not as complete as catch wrestling, but it still has that top-down approach. So it's much easier to like integrate striking into someone who has like a wrestling background, and then they can dominate. So that's why really they have other people have other theories. But you hear people talking about like how wrestlers are just used to grinding or used to really working out hard, taking some pain, because a lot of like the pinning moves and stuff, they're really painful. So they're designed to be painful so that you will, in order to relieve some pain, you'll go onto your back, right? So because there's no tapping out, right? So if you want to tap out, you gotta roll onto your back. So there's kind of like this whole idea where it's like it can make you tough, right? So there's all these different aspects, but I think a lot of times it's much easier to have this top-down approach. It just blends in easy to fighting, right? Than a bottom up. Yeah. So not to say that like jujitsu, like in jujitsu competitions, people start standing, but a lot of times then they go, especially nowadays in no gi, people will even in gi as well. You get people who just sit down as quickly as possible. I think that's why ADCC had the rule where you can't pull guard, because you get people just sitting down. See who they see who can sit down the fastest, and see who can pull the other guy onto them as fast. Whoever can win that race to the bottom, right? So a lot of times it's considered not good to have a race to the bottom, right? So, but that's probably why. But MMA in particular is kind of helping wrestling to survive, because amateur wrestling like freestyle, pretty much got kicked out of the Olympics, those few years ago, and then there was a big uproar about, like you can't have the Olympics without wrestling. But I mean, there's been a lot of mismanagement and whatnot, and I think even rules changes over time. It gets to where even many of you guys, I think a lot of people have commented where it's like they tried to get into like watching freestyle, but then there's so many rules, and you don't even know like how someone won at many matches. I think there was one recently I didn't watch, but it was a Jordan Burroughs match with Chamiso, right, the Italian, and basically there was hardly any wrestling. I think they won by getting a point by pushing someone out of the circle, and so then you get these kind of points games, and then sometimes people will be at the end of the time they'll be tied, right? But then a winner is automatically declared. So then a lot of times that leaves the audience where it's like, how did that? It was tied. How did someone win? And like they just chose someone. And so there's a lot of things that need to be explained, and that's not good, right? That's not good for like spectators to not understand what's happening. And so these are the types of things that happen in amateur wrestling that kill it, right? So MMA was able to show how well wrestlers can actually like do in MMA competition. So because of that, so like that's why like in China, people like have reached out to me to help, because um, they see the value in wrestling and they want to learn it. And so that's why like it kind of survived, right? Otherwise, like if jujitsu was as dominant, then wrestling I think could be gone, right? Because then like there'd have to be like a huge outcry where again, where it's kind of like that's what saved wrestling from it got cut basically, and then the outcry of people are what kind of kept it back in. But like the management and stuff like that, like the whole idea of helping people understand, it doesn't seem to be happening. And that's yeah. So just the other week, one of you guys, so someone made a comment about that, where it's like, man, I've been trying so hard to understand freestyle, but makes no sense. So it's hard to watch. So it's true. It's true. All right. So Patrick, I've seen you in a few Shuai Jiao and Sanda videos and channels. What's your take on them, and how do you integrate it with catch wrestling? Well, kind of like what I was saying earlier, where it's like for fighting, you have kind of like the stand-up approach where everyone starts standing, you're striking. It's like in MMA and in Sanda too, Sanda kickboxing, even Muay Thai kickboxing. Um, like in kickboxing styles, you have all these different types of takedowns. Sanda, so Chinese kickboxing, has much more takedowns, much more wrestling oriented than Muay Thai, and much more wrestling oriented than basically the other kickboxing styles. So that's why I think like Sanda and catch wrestling blend perfectly, because you have this this basically the stand up style that has the wrestling in there. So you have a lot of these takedowns, a lot of slams, and then you can just follow it up with the catch wrestling finish. So you can either pin somebody or go for some kind of submission hold. So I think those two styles in particular, catch wrestling and Sanda, they just blend easily. so easily. And that's basically, I started in San the first back in the 1990s, actually, when I was a wee lad, right? And so that's why later when I was, doing some grappling and, like in LA, the, jiu-jitsu was already really growing. We had all these, jiu-jitsu pioneers moved to LA and all that. So they were spreading it. So I did a lot of classes, but it didn't quite match my understanding of grappling, whereas more of that top-down approach. And so even with my experience doing Shuai Jiao, and so I went to China to their sports university to train in Chinese kickboxing and Chinese wrestling. And so I was able to do really well in the jiu-jitsu classes. And that's why I was just like, oh, there's got to be more to grappling than jiu-jitsu and also amateur wrestling, because again, amateur wrestling doesn't have submission holds, so there's got to be something that's like more complete, right? Something more holistic that has this top-down approach from my understanding of fighting and grappling, and that has the submissions and all that as well. And catch wrestling is it, basically. So I think more so than other styles, because like again, I usually, in China they don't use gis and all that really. But in Chinese, in the jacket wrestling, or what people usually call shuai jiao, they'll use like a vest, but it's not like judo so much, or it's not you don't have to put on the long sleeve jacket, you don't have to put on this whole gi or anything like that. So it is different in that way. So in a way, I think kind of matches more, even like kind of nogi. And then they're actually, I heard from the U.S. Shuai Jiao Association that they've already started doing nogi competitions. So it's like Shuai Jiao, so basically takedowns. But then you can also start thinking it's becoming more and more similar then to sumo wrestling. But sumo wrestling also has some palm strikes. So there'll still be those little differences, but like yeah, it's usually takedown competitions. Um, but there is movement kind of away from gi, right? So and even now, so like my student and good friend Juan Gonzalez, who was here, just a few weeks ago, we put together a no gi judo like instructional series, because he wants to kind of introduce people to how to do some judo throws without gi, right? Because in MMA you don't have gi, right? In no gi, of course, no gi, right? Catch wrestling, no gi, right? But we do have submissions, right? So I think that's why all these things combined can really help you. Okay, Spaz. Do you guys research your submission aspects from the old books and things, or is it more recreation from word of mouth, coaches that have been passed down? Yeah, it is. So and this is actually, Spaz, is a really good question, because this is one of the points like why our channel, or why Catch Wrestling Alliance is different, because especially nowadays, you're hearing more and more people talk about catch wrestling. So you'll hear the most random people mention that title, or a lot of people claim to be doing catch wrestling nowadays. Like we've had a guest, Sam Young, a few weeks ago, talk about how he I guess he got like a instructor certification from another school that a lot of people from his school, even though at his school they didn't call it catch wrestling, but because it's kind of like this grappling system, then people who got the same certification he did, now they're out like selling DVDs, calling themselves catch wrestlers, when their stuff is more judo based and all that. So there are a lot of people who, like, you could easily call yourself a catch wrestler, because there isn't quite that lineage aspect that like that jiu-jitsu has, where it's like there's even kind of like registries and IBJJF of recognized black belt coaches and stuff like that. Uh, we don't necessarily have that kind of thing, so that's one of the reasons why Catch Wrestling Alliance is here, because there is ultimately a style of wrestling that evolved in Northern England, right? Called catch wrestling or catch as catch can, or sometimes you call it Lancashire wrestling because that's the region of England that it evolved in. Um, and so when we see people, so say like my experience is with Wigan directly, right? So um, Roy Wood, who trained with Billy Riley, which was the coach of both Roy Wood and Billy Robinson, who I also trained with. Um, they will kind of have similar. They'll have a lot of things similar, right? But then when I talk with my good buddy John Strickland from the East Coast here in the United States, you see that. So he has like the American type lineage of catch wrestling, which again comes from England, right? And so we can see even without really trying to explain anything to each other, we see like some of our techniques were just like so similar. Like we maybe just had some different terminology, right? And like, but the details were almost exactly the same, right? So we know that even though we were separated for 100 years, we know that we're the same thing, right? And so with that being said, it's like you'll see the other people who might be talking about doing catch wrestling, you'll see them do things that are more characteristic of other styles, maybe more characteristic of judo, more characteristic of Shaijiao, or or Japanese jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so that's why we can say that, oh, that doesn't look like what we do, because we have several old timers, right? So in case of John Strickland, he's not an old timer, but he was trained by Billy Wicks, who was an old timer, right? So who did we call it the AT